I'm Sadie Stewart, and I'm from Northeast Ohio, Cleveland. I just want to make one statement. You all are here because we have agreed in this country to be governed by the will of the people. And the way that we know the will of the people is through their vote. That's why you all are assembled here, and that's why these people are here. That vote cannot boil down to Democratic and Republican candidates. That vote, the will of the people, must include people who do not identify themselves with either party. And that's something that, as a black from Tuskegee, Alabama, that experienced the most extreme case of gerrymandering in order to block people out, we're still blocking people out. So in Ohio, I'm blocked out because I don't affiliate with a particular party. And I know that you know that the will of the people should include and does include all of the people. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairpersons Bauer and Ginsburg and Commissioners. My name is Jonathan Lippincott, and I'm an independent voter from Hamilton County, Ohio. It's an honor for our county to host this commission. I've read your mission statement and, of course, accept that as your focus, very important issues. But I want to add my voice to those who hope that you will also take into consideration the fundamental barriers to full voting participation faced by millions of independent voters in Ohio and nationally. Yes, independent voters can vote in general elections, but as you know, in close to half the states, independent voters have no voice in selecting the candidates who appear on the general election ballot. Further, we are marginalized by partisan redistricting that in many districts predetermines the outcome of the general election. Nationally, according to voter registration statistics cited by USA Today, 2.5 million Americans have left the two parties in the past 5 years. At the same time, the number of independents has grown to all-time highs, and as you may have read in a recent Atlantic Monthly article, the 95 million millennials who are becoming very active are going to accelerate these trends dramatically. Despite these trends, discrimination against full electoral participation by independent voters is prevalent, and this is a voting rights issue. Closed primaries, party-controlled redistricting, and party control of electoral machinery are fundamental barriers to independent voters' full inclusion and access. Discrimination against independent voters is also a root cause of much of our government gridlock, as the voices of strong partisans are amplified by the electoral process and those of independents are muffled. It is telling that as the number of independents grows and party affiliation declines, the partisan divide in Congress is at historic highs, and trust of the American people in government is at historic lows. This disconnect must be addressed if American democracy is to regain its health. I urge you to include the testimony of independents and the issues they raise in the report that you will produce. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Hi, my name is Mary Rook. I am a registered voter in Ohio, and I know that I am a part of a sizable proportion of voters who do care about this country and are anxious to see candidates who feel the same way. They could care less about party affiliation, but they do care that whoever is elected brings fresh ideas and rigorous transparency to their elected office and to the whole process of entering the political fray. I understand the importance of a smooth electoral process, of making voting procedures credible, but I think it's still neglecting the most vital element of representative government: open participation by all voters, and also involvement by candidates who care about their communities, not just towing a two-party line.
Thank you. Tracy Winbush.
My name is Camille Wimbish, and I'm with the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition. And we believe that the election administration should be viewed through the eyes of the voter. Our goal should be to make voting as convenient and accessible to all segments of the population. We believe in expansive early voting opportunities that include evenings and weekends, and that is especially true for the last weekend before the election. In Ohio, during the last 3 days of early voting, when we had early voting wait times in large counties between 1 and 4 hours, whereas small counties had wait times of much shorter time. So the idea is that we need to be looking to ensure uniformity of access to the ballot for all voters, regardless of where they live. We also need better data to ensure accountability of election officials and to make sure that we're remedying problems. We need to require counties to have data submitted that talk about the wait times, that have election complaint tracking and resolution of the problems. And we also need data on knowing on who is voting provisionally and why. We would like to see online voting registration expanded to include not just BMV records, but also to include the Department of Job and Family Services. About 10% of Ohioans do not have a driver's license, and we already have the Social Security numbers of people and the data sharing ability with Job and Family Services to be able to get these people registered using those services. So we should be allowing low-income citizens to be able to use the benefits of online voter registration just as we do for people with licenses. And finally, I'd encourage you to consult the report of Norman Robbins from the Northeast Ohio Voter Advocates, who's already submitted the written testimony, which will show you the alarming drop in rates of registrations from the Department of Job and Family Services in Ohio and around the country. And we thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. The real Tracy Winbush.
Good afternoon. I'm honored to have this opportunity to speak to the Commission, and it's an honor to yield my voice to such an important process. As I sit here and listen to testimony, and as I went through my time to collect my thoughts driving down and to write up my testimony, it still stands the same. Our democracy is built upon education and knowledge and access. And as long as we politicize, undereducate, don't inform, we will have what we have. If we really want systemic change, we're going to have to get to the root of the problem. I sit on the Mahoning County Board of Elections, and I'm there because I care, and I love this country, as most of us in this room. I want to say that early voting here in Ohio is 35 days. During the 2012 election, Secretary Houston, he sent out absentee ballot requests by mail to every registered voter in the state. They came to their house. If you filled it out with your name, your address, your date of birth, and some type of form of ID, your last four of your social, letting people know that you were there, you did not have to have a photo ID. And if you mailed it back to the Board of Elections, it came to your house. I did that. I went to the Board of Elections to cast my vote, and I walked by hundreds of people standing in line who received the same form in the mail that I did, that chose not to do it. That's a problem. Now, is it my fault because the Board of Elections didn't let everyone know that all they had to do was fill it out? Even if they wanted to drop it off, it would have been simple. But something's wrong here, because I walked past hundreds of people in line to get to the counter, hand them my ballot, turned around and walked out because it came to my house, just like my bills, just like everything else. I ask that we use some common sense. You know, we have Amish community here. They don't take frontal photos. I understand that, and we shouldn't step on their religious beliefs to make them have a photo ID, but they should prove who they are by saying, this is where I live and this is who I am. But we should not politicize this. Because the more we politicize it, the more we leave people like the independent voters and other people on the sidelines. This is about America, and this is about the future. We are a democracy, and we're great. And until we start acting like it and quit acting like we're kids in a playground playing, we lose. So I hope you will accept my testimony, and please take it into consideration. We just need to have a good, open, honest conversation with education across the board, and just make the right decisions, no matter who we are. Because at the end of the day, when tragedy happens here across our nation, we are still Americans. And there's no party, there's no race, there's no gender, there's no nothing. It's just us. Thank you.
Thank you. Norman Wernett.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Norman Wernett, and I represent the Ohio Alliance for Retired Americans. Bentley Davis is our state director. We have about 250,000 members, and through our affiliates, we represent about 450,000 retirees and older Americans. We take very seriously the right of the franchise. Many of us actually fought for the right to vote. Some of our members actually were women who enjoyed the first time of the right to vote in this country. You've heard a lot of testimony about Ohio's notorious long lines and issues in our procedure. Many of those barriers actually are issues for older Ohioans who attempt to vote. Things like moving precinct lines, not being able to know which precinct you were in. It took a federal court actually to order the Secretary of State and the boards of elections to properly direct people to the proper precinct so they could choose to exercise their right of the franchise. The Ohio Alliance for Retired Americans thinks that you and others can help us develop a new metric and standards so that we can discourage these barriers and change the way the voting procedures occur in various states and here in the state of Ohio. Just one incident that might be enlightening. One of our members was encountered a picayune reason for not counting her vote. She took advantage of vote by mail, put her mail in the ballot, and got a postcard back a couple of days before the election. She was ordered to cure her ballot because she did not fully lick the inside of the envelope interiorly. She had tacked it down like most of us would, just tacking the inside envelope. But they would not touch her ballot and would not count her ballot until the entire ballot was sealed. We think that that's a barrier that could easily be removed by boards of elections. Older Americans understand well the right of the franchise and why it's very important. We take seriously those issues that confront us and the candidates that confront us in those elections. We ask that barriers be removed and that you help us in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Cody Rizzuto.
Commissioners, my name is Cody Rizzuto, and I am a junior at the University of Cincinnati studying marketing with a minor in political science. I wanted to thank you for coming here today to take testimony on ways to improve our election system. I've always taken an active interest in politics from the time I grew up in Madeira, Ohio, which is not too far from here. I had the great opportunity of going home and voting easily and efficiently at my local polling place in Madeira. However, I wanted to talk to you today about what I saw on campus as a student. Throughout the 2012 election, we heard accusations of voter suppression, that students were being disenfranchised. But this is absolutely not what I observed. Early on in the fall, I received, along with every student, an absentee ballot request from Secretary of State John Husted's office. This gave every single student the opportunity to request an absentee ballot without having to worry about missing class on election day to vote or worry about re-registering to vote in Hamilton County if they were from another county. I can't even tell you the amount of my friends who took advantage of this great service that Secretary Husted provided students. I would request the Commission to take any allegations of voter suppression of students with caution, because in my opinion, because of Secretary Husted, every student had ample opportunity to vote, and I would encourage him to continue sending absentee ballot request forms to students. Thank you.
Thank you. Carla Herron.
Commissioners, good afternoon. I would like to leave you my written testimony, if that's okay, and I'll just hit the highlights for the time that's allowed. My name is Carla Herron, and I am the Director of Delaware County Board of Elections here in Ohio, and also the President of our Ohio Association of Election Officials. So I thought my perspective would hopefully add valuable insight to the job that you've undertaken. Some of the highlights, I really wanted to hit 4 points. And one is new voting equipment, which I'm going to pass because I think you've heard a lot about that. And also media scrutiny. Of course, I'm from a battleground state, so need I say more? It's been pretty tough on us, the media. What I would like to talk about a little bit is legislation, legal, legislative, and administration changes, which is a challenge for us. The veterans of election administration will tell you that for many years, our jobs were fairly routine and static. Rules were straightforward, they were easy to understand. All the parties in the election system were familiar with them. And right now, it's just really the exact opposite. Probably a good way to put it is The only thing that's constant is change. With lawsuits came directives, with directives came legislation, and the cycle continued over and over. So that's one thing I'd like for you to consider when you're, looking at changes and how that would affect us. I believe that both political parties seek to gain advantage by manipulating the election system, which we have to deal with at a local level. I noticed that one of our representatives were here today, and it makes me sad that at the State House they look at the way we handle provisionals, and her comment was so many of them didn't count. I can tell you from a Board of Elections standpoint, most of ours just weren't registered in the state of Ohio. So I just hope there's different perspective, and I hope you'll just look at them, more simply. And speaking of looking at things simple, one thing to look at when we talk about lines and algorithms and all the things that could be thrown into it, one thing in Ohio, we have 4 poll workers for each of the precincts, and we have a cap on how many can be in each line when they walk through the door. It's almost impossible to have 4 to 5 hours wait time. So if you could, I know that there's all kinds of fancy things, but I hope you just look at it simply. Do simple math, and I think that's one thing that would be helpful. And I guess with that, like I said, I have quite a bit to say, but I will leave that with you, and I just hope that you take the time to read through it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kermit Davis.
Good afternoon. I am Kermit Davis, the Secretary-Treasurer of Human Factors and Ergonomics Society and Associate Professor at the University of Cincinnati. I'm here today to explain the value of human factors to improving the voter experience. The field of human factors and ergonomics works to develop safe, effective, and practical human use of technology known as human systems integration. Human factors research can help improve usability, accessibility in the voting system by contributing to greater understanding of how the devices we use, such as voting machines, and the environment in which we interact, such as polling place, interact to affect human decision-making. Application of human factors and development of new systems and processes will enable an enhanced voting experience, one that can ensure access for all Americans seeking to cast their vote. This is not a new challenge for the scientific community. Researchers have been addressing voting technology, accessibility, and usability issues for decades. Work at the National Institute of Standards and Technology has highlighted the importance of clear ballot instructions, developing a style guide for systems documentation, created guidelines for writing clear instructions for voters and poll workers, and proposed human performance metrics for voting equipment. Applying these human factors and usability considerations to design to promote human understanding of voting technology, as well as how to use voting materials and technology more easily and comfortably, making the process more effective. Some work has previously been done to translate human factors research findings into voting practices. In 2003, the Institute of Electronics Engineers developed a standard for the equipment used by voters and precinct workers. Despite these advances, though, more work is needed to ensure that the voters are able to reliably cast their vote for the intended candidate in a reasonable amount of time in a manner that does not lead to stress or confusion. Therefore, Human Factors and Ergonomics Society urges the Commission to consider the following principles. Research findings from human factors, including system integration, must be considered when setting standards and guidelines for improving voter experience, especially with respect to usability and accessibility. Research findings suggest that designs that are helpful for older workers or older voters and voters with disabilities are also useful to younger and more able-bodied voters. Human factors research findings must consider all relevant points of voting process. This includes the design and layout of voting machines at the polling place, the design of the voting technology themselves, the design of the ballots, and the role of the poll workers. Human factors must be considered with respect to management and poll workers' processes, materials, and technologies. Although the proper training is important, effective design and implementation of technology and systems increase efficiency, usability, and ultimately reduces long lines and confusion. Thank you for this opportunity to express these views on behalf of the Human Factors Ergonomics Society. We are happy to serve as a resource for further research and data. Thank you again.
Thank you. Danielle Gray.
Hello, I'm Danielle Gray from Disability Rights Ohio. Disability Rights Ohio is the system designated by Ohio's governor under federal and state law to protect and advocate for the rights of people with disabilities in the state of Ohio. Our mission is to advocate for the human, civil, and legal rights of people with disabilities in Ohio. We are committed to ensuring that all people have access to the election process without regard to any physical or mental disabilities that they may have. The right to vote is one of the most important ways an individual can participate in society and government. In an effort to ensure that individuals with disabilities have access to the electoral process, Disability Rights Ohio educates and informs individuals, local boards of elections, and policymakers about the voting rights of people with disabilities, investigates complaints about polling place accessibilities and other barriers, and represents individuals with disabilities when seeking to participate in the electoral process. We also operate a toll-free hotline on Election Day that allows voters to bring denial of access to polling places or equal opportunity to cast a ballot issues to our attention. Based on our experience of representing individual clients and monitoring these issues from a policy perspective, Disability Rights Ohio offers the following as best practices to the Commission. First, we recommend that the state and local election boards establish and maintain open lines of communication with the Protection and Advocacy, or PNA, system in their state at all times, but particularly on Election Day and in the weeks and months before. Issues affecting voters with disabilities can arise quickly and unexpectedly, and resolution of these issues must occur promptly so that no one is unlawfully disenfranchised. I have enclosed a report with my written testimony detailing important issues which we observed during the November 2012 election. One issue required the filing of a lawsuit in federal court, even as the matter could have been resolved informally if there had been better communication with election officials. PNA organizations are often the best equipped to help educate elections officials about compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Help America Vote Act, and to provide recommendations on how to make the elections process more accessible for voters with disabilities. Second, we recommend the operation of toll-free hotlines dedicated to voting rights calls and staffed by trained professionals on Election Day. We recommend that advocacy organizations be prepared to address and/or investigate voting rights questions throughout the election season. I've also enclosed a report that we have from operating our hotline in 2012 with my written testimony. Finally, we recommend that all information about elections be provided on accessible websites. As more individuals use websites to perform functions related to voting, it's becoming more and more important that these websites be accessible to all voters. Disability Rights Ohio appreciates the opportunity to share these recommendations with the Commission, and we respectfully request that the Commission take into consideration the disability community suggestions as you craft your report. Thank you.
Thank you. Diana Mayrose.
Hello, my name is Diana Mayrose from Cincinnati, Ohio. I work at the Hamilton County Developmental Disability Services as an advocate for people with disabilities. I have been a faithful voter since the year 2000. For the 2012 election, I worked with the National Self-Advocacy Group, advocacy organization for people with developmental disabilities. Self-advocates become empowered to interview people with disabilities about the voting experience. What we learned from voters was that having a disability is not the problem with voting. It is having accessible equipment, accessible locations, and the respect to do so. Best practices for voters with a disability should be the same as any other voter in the country. Let's begin with accessible equipment. It will become universal equipment. All voters across the United States would use the same type of equipment that every voter in the country would use at the voting precinct. Why? Poll workers would be able to easily support voters because only one type of equipment would be used. Right now, many of the poll workers do not know how to use the accessible equipment. Voters who require accessible equipment would not have to be singled out and taken to a special area to use piece of equipment that even most poll voters do not know how to use. Most universal changes, such as in housing, workplaces, etc., have benefited people with and without disabilities. Therefore, the best practice I recommend is to use the Prime 3 voting system developed by Clemson University. I have used this system and I love it. It is easier to read and understand. Secondly, there are accessible voting locations scattered all over the country, but are just not enough of them. Here in Hamilton County, we have worked closely with Amy Searcy, Director of the Hamilton County Board of Elections, to make sure voting locations meet the Department of Justice regulations for accessibility. When a voting location is identified, it must meet the accessibility standards outlined by the Department of Justice. Assisted locations should be brought up to meet these standards as stated in the Help American Vote Act. Type of equipment. In my opinion, if a location is not 100% accessible and in the process of improvement, voters should be told where the accessible entrance locations might be, parking, etc., when they arrive at the voting location. Therefore, the best practice I recommend is to have a worker outside the location who can direct and assist voters who require additional and/or different supports to make sure their experience is a positive one. These workers would be paid in about 3 to 4 hour shifts, unlike the poll workers who work the entire day. Most poll workers respect and care about the voting experiences of all voters, but there are some who are not comfortable, thus seem disrespectful to the voter when assisting a voter with a disability to vote. Poll worker training must be reviewed to ensure that all poll workers receive at least 1 hour of training on how to effectively work with voters who have a disability. The training should be done by people with disabilities and include role-playing and hands-on use of the accessible equipment. Therefore, the best practice I recommend is that every precinct has an assigned poll worker to assist people using accessible equipment. This would not be needed if the same type of equipment is used by everyone, thus being a more effective use of funding. In summary, why make voting different for different people? Why not make voting the same for every citizen? In this way, we can answer my opening statement. Having a disability is not the problem with voting. It is having accessible equipment, accessible location, and the respect to do so. Thank you for your time and giving me the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you for that very helpful testimony. Jocelyn Bucaro and Lynn Edward Kincaid.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Southwest Ohio, and thank you for this opportunity to provide public testimony. My name is Jocelyn Bucaro. I serve as the Deputy Director of the Butler County Board of Elections. Butler County is the neighboring county to the north of Hamilton County. Like the state of Ohio, Butler is home to a mixture of older industrial cities, like Hamilton and Middletown, fast-growing suburbs, and rural towns and villages. We're also home to Miami University of Oxford, and our representative in Congress is the House Speaker, John Boehner, whose home is in Butler County. In the 2012 presidential election, we had over 241,000 registered voters, of whom 71% or 171,000 voted. We had 299 precincts voting in 101 polling locations, staffed with more than 1,300 precinct election officials. We share with our colleagues across the state and country a deep pride and humility about the work we do as election officials. We hold ourselves to the highest standard of professionalism and integrity, recognizing that we are the front lines of democracy. To that end, we're constantly seeking ways to improve election administration and to find ways to make it easier for our voters to vote. More likely, their votes will be counted and to run our elections in the most efficient manner possible. 2012 was a year of great scrutiny and at times uncertainty and change for election administrators in the state of Ohio. Intense media scrutiny coupled by court decisions and last-minute changes kept us all on our toes right up to Election Day, but we worked through it, serving our voters first and foremost. In recognition of the important issues and concerns you all hope to address through your work, I wanted to share an observation or a couple of observations with you about our frontline experiences and how we hope to be able to make elections better for voters. Ohio's provisional voting laws have been the subject of national scrutiny and litigation in state and federal courts since the 2004 presidential election. In practice, provisional voting or second chance voting in Ohio works for the vast majority of voters. But for the minority of voters whose votes are rejected due to voter or poll worker errors, there are clearly problems that we would like to address. Provisional ballots under Ohio law are rejected for several reasons, three of whom include if the voter's not registered to vote in Ohio, didn't provide a permissible form of identification, or already cast a ballot in the election, their ballot would be rejected. And no one disputes that any of those ballots should be rejected. However, voters also have their provisional ballots rejected if they're cast in the wrong polling place or did not complete the form properly. And those are the ballots that we find most concerning because they're often due to errors either on the part of the voter or precinct election officials. Butler County, in Butler County, we had 6,800 provisional ballots cast in 2012. That was down from 7,800 cast in 2008. The decrease, we believe, was due in large part to the decrease in the number of wrong precinct provisional ballots cast. In 2008, we had 403 of those ballots rejected. In 2012, we had 135. I see my time is up, and I'd like to ask that the testimony that I submitted to the commission be entered into the record. And thank you so much for your time.
We'd be happy to do that. Thank you. Philip Hasher.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here to speak and share a story with you. As you just said, my name is Lieutenant Hasher from the U.S. Army Reserves, and I just returned from a 9-month stint in Kuwait this March. And as many of you may already know, Kuwait is probably one of the better locations to be deployed in that there's plenty of infrastructure, well-established means of communication, and there's a very low threat level. However, during the 2012 election season, it was an additional duty of mine as the unit commander to ensure that my soldiers had the ability to cast their ballots for their elected officials back home. While the military tries to convey the importance of voting, it is neither easy to do nor is it an efficient system that we currently operate on. The Army utilizes additional duty appointments assigned to leaders throughout the region being where you're operating in, to ensure that our soldiers are aware of the process of how to cast their ballots. Unfortunately, these additional duties only last for a 3 to 4 month period and are not that soldier's primary duty, and in fact, many times it's one of their 8th or 9th additional duties, so it often gets pushed to the wayside. I'm certainly not here to place blame on anyone that I worked with overseas. In fact, I work with many outstanding soldiers. But I'm just like to tell you that these duties get placed in hands that are of people who are extremely busy. My point is that voting is said to be very important, but continues to be very difficult, even in a place where the military has spent the last 11 years. However, in all our struggles to receive our ballots in time to be counted, there was a saving grace after I contacted the Secretary of State's office in Ohio. Not only did I hear directly from John Husted, but also members of his staff reached out to me and my family to see what they could do to ensure all of my soldiers received their ballots. We only saw a part of what they did, and I'm sure there were dozens of phone calls made to local districts, including my own, to inform them that we needed help overseas. We were able to cast our ballots specifically because of the work done by John Husted's office, his team, and their dedication to serve the people of Ohio. As a member of the military, it is especially heartwarming to know that the people we elected truly care about the military's ability to exercise their right to vote. I have continued to work with the Secretary of State's office in the future. Continue to work with the Secretary of State's office in ways to improve the system, and look forward to working with them in the future, and feel honored that they've included me in that opportunity. Thanks for all your time today, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. Carrie Davis.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Carrie Davis. I am the Executive Director for the League of Women Voters of Ohio. And prior to that, I was a voting rights litigator in Ohio, which certainly keeps you busy in this state. I will, in the interest of time, direct you to written testimony that includes really a discussion of our lessons learned. Certainly, Ohio has had its election challenges over the years, many of which have been well documented, because as prior speakers have mentioned, as a battleground state, we're constantly under the microscope. And anytime you look at something closely, you see the flaws in clear detail. And we won't doubt, we certainly have had those challenges over the years. But we've also learned several lessons from those challenges of what works and what doesn't. And my written testimony goes into this in considerably more detail than I can in 3 minutes. One of those is something that doesn't work that a couple of prior speakers mentioned, and that is the rapid-fire change of rules. This was especially problematic in 2011 and 2012, where we like to joke that if you didn't like the voting rules, wait 5 minutes and they'll change again, because that's how it was, and that was difficult all around. It was difficult for election administrators, for poll workers to stay up to speed, for voters, for voter advocates. That's a challenge. Having clear rules that stay the same at least through that election cycle makes a huge difference. All the data shows that it takes voters and poll workers about 2 years to adapt to changes. So we want to make sure that we have that time in place so that everybody can be educated and comfortable about the process. Also, looking at the different issue areas that this commission is charged with addressing. One possible solution we'd like to direct you towards is something that came out of the mess that we had in the 2004 elections. The Ohio League, along with a number of voters, filed suit against the state, alleging a range of problems, from long lines to not having enough poll workers to not having enough voting machines, lots of problems that came down to planning. Through the course of this litigation, it eventually settled, and the settlement agreement, which is in the written materials I'll give you, requires all the county boards of elections to draft a written election administration plan that has details and makes them think out and plan how they're going to account for all those what-if situations. What if there's a flood? What if there's a power outage? What if a poll worker doesn't show up? What if we have long lines? A whole range of problems. And this way, they have a document to turn to. And we'll tell you in doing our review of these EAPs, as we call them, initially, they left some room for improvement, some in cases a lot. Over the years, they have improved. One thing that helped last year, there was a directive issued by the Secretary's office that had a list of guidelines, and that's included in your materials too. It's basically a template of fill in the blanks, and that helped improve considerably the quality of these plans, the preparation, the planning, and I see my time is out, but I'd be happy to speak with any of you more about that, and you'll have the written testimony as well with more details. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheryl Jansen.
Good afternoon, members of the Commission, and thank you for this opportunity to be before you today. My name is Cheryl Jansen. I'm with Equip for Equality. We are the organization that is designated by the governor to implement the federally mandated protection and advocacy system for people with disabilities in Illinois. Historically, people with disabilities have been underrepresented at the polls, and I regret to say that based upon statistics from the 2012 election, that disparity continues to exist. And that's even with the passage of HAVA in 2002 and many advances in state law that make registration and voting easier as a general matter. When the 2008 election was held, only 1/3 of polling places were barrier-free. That is unacceptable. I'm not aware of any national data that is more recent than that, but I can tell you that based upon our own experience in terms of doing polling place accessibility surveys and conducting consumer surveys, as well as conducting an election day helpline, that there's no question that physical access continues to be a problem for people with disabilities at the polls. And as was alluded to during the course of this hearing, that's true even though many of the problems could be remedied by very simple measures at very low or no cost. Providing a parking area that has clear signage exhibiting the international symbol for disability access, or positioning the machine in such a way that there's unimpeded access and privacy. Those physical barriers not only thwart voting by people with disabilities, but they also send a very strong message that people with disabilities aren't equal or welcome participants in the electoral process. One of the second major barriers, I think this is really key, is inadequate election authority and/or election judge training. We have had voters with disabilities tell us that the so-called accessible machine doesn't work, might not be plugged in, that election judges don't know how to start or operate the machine, that it's not positioned in a way that's easily accessed or provides privacy. We've heard about voters who've been asked to wait for half an hour while an election judge tries to troubleshoot the machine or get a technician, and in some cases people are asked to go home and come back later in the hopes that the machine will then be working. We've encountered election judges who fail to display or offer aids, such as magnifying glasses, to voters with visual disabilities, who challenge the right or competence of individuals with disabilities to vote, and who question the right of a voter with a disability to be assisted by a person of his or her choice. All of these factors contribute to lower levels of participation and a less satisfying voter experience. And all of them point to the need for an improvement in the quality and content of election judge training. My final point, a very commonly cited reason for people with disabilities not voting is a lack of transportation to the polls. Although absentee voting is now an option for all qualified voters in Illinois, many find it a poor substitute for engaging in the voting process along with their fellow citizens. The community voter, as it was alluded to yesterday. While early voting provides people with some flexibility as to when they vote, it still requires transportation. And the lack of accessible transportation that's affordable and reliable is not an issue addressed by HAVA or state law. However, for voters with disabilities to become full and equal participants in the electoral process, it really is a problem that needs to be recognized and addressed.
Thank you. If you could summarize.
Yes. And so in closing, I would just say that as you move forward to develop your recommendations and issue your final report to President Obama, we hope that you will give these continuing barriers for people with disabilities your careful consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Ngozi Ndulu.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to speak before the Commission. My name is Ngozi Ndulu, and I am the Race and Justice Project Director at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. I'm coming before the Commission today to talk about another set of barriers, and that's barriers to voting for people in jail. My particular interest in this matter is, as Race and Justice Project Director, I recognize that any barriers to voting in jail fall more heavily on minority populations, in particular the African American population, because of the disproportionate number of African American people who are arrested and incarcerated. For example, in Hamilton County, African Americans make up only 25% of the total population, and they made this up in 2010, but they comprise 49.6% of the persons arrested in the county. On an average day in Ohio, over 700 people are arrested and 20,000 are jailed. The vast majority of these individuals are pretrial detainees, as well as persons serving misdemeanor sentences. Technically, Ohio law only strips voting rights from those who are incarcerated for felonies or for violation of felony community control probation. However, in practice, there are a number of barriers to voting for individuals who are jailed on Election Day. And I think 3 areas of barriers I'd like to address. 2 are about education and 1 is about equity. The first area of education is educating the people that are in the best position to facilitate voters for those in jail, and that's jail administrators and local boards of elections. When the awareness of some of the issues with voting from jail, when we became aware of that at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, we sent out some public records requests to various board of elections. And some boards of elections had a great understanding of the rights of jailed inmates to vote. We even got, however, not everybody had that same knowledge, and even one board of elections said, well, people in jail can't vote. So clearly they're not doing anything to facilitate voting for people in jail. Now, educating those on the board of elections and educating those who are administrating jails and can actually facilitate voting is important, but we also need to be reaching out to the people who are in jail with education campaigns. Many people that we've talked to thought that they couldn't vote because they were in jail and didn't realize the very limited number of people in Ohio who are unable to vote because of a conviction. A third point is about equity. Our organization represents a number of community organizations interested in the criminal justice system and voting, and we filed suit because of some issues of inequity for jailed voters, in particular that for people who find themselves unable to vote for other unforeseen circumstances, being hospitalized for an emergency, they're able to vote up till 3 p.m. on Election Day. However, for people who find themselves in jail at the same time, there is no practical way, even though technically they have the right to vote. And we ask that the Commission consider these issues in making sure that all people have the ability to exercise the right to vote as they should. Thank you.
Thank you. Cliff Arnebeck.
Thank you. I'm here on behalf of Election Protection Action. I have an extensive background as an election lawyer. I served as counsel to the Ohio Senate Republican Campaign Committee during Paul Gilmore's tenure as the Senate Republican leader here in Ohio. I served as counsel for the legal committee of the Coalition to End the Permanent Congress, which is a bipartisan group which sued the Congress successfully in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. I filed the challenge to the 2004 presidential election before the Ohio Supreme Court. I was asked at the time we filed it, how does it feel to do what you just did? I said I felt honored to be in the company of Reverend Jesse Jackson, the man who had walked with Martin Luther King. Reverend Jackson said, if Martin Luther King were alive today, he would be here. I continued to litigate the election of 2004 in an attempt to do so before the federal court. Then we subsequently filed an action, a separate action in federal court, where we were successful in getting the ballots to be retained beyond the 22-month mandatory retention period, and we were successful in getting a full accounting of all of the ballots that had been illegally destroyed in violation of the retention period and the court order. I have recently represented the Tea Party, one faction of the Tea Party litigating against another. The President of the United States drew a red line in regard to our election process in his State of the Union address. It was in regard to the disgrace of an African-American elderly woman having to wait in line for a very long time. You seem to be addressing this problem as a problem of poor administration. I'd like to suggest that the possibility that voter suppression and vote switching is not a problem of poor administration. but rather the function of a highly sophisticated, well-organized, institutionalized part of our American election process. I urge that you have one more public meeting, perhaps in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where much of this activity has been coordinated, and ask Jill Simpson to appear before you as an expert and address the subject of intentional vote switching and vote suppression. The Election Protection Action Corporation began out of a series of 3 serendipitous events on June 20th of 2012. The 3 events...
I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to summarize, but we're happy to take any written testimony that you've had.
There was a letter to Bob Bauer sent to Karl Rove. There was a campaign, a march on the American Crossroads, and Karl Rove interpreted this as a coordinated attack upon him. Jill then got involved in this, and she affected the 2012 election. We
look forward to reading how. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
We now have, I believe, 4 people who would like to give a joint presentation. Amy Searcy, Sherry Poland, Mary Siegel, Susan Holtzkel, or maybe 2.
Good afternoon. And Commissioners, thank you for your service. My name is Amy Searcy, and I'm the Director of the Hamilton County, Ohio Board of Elections. Welcome to Cincinnati and welcome to Hamilton County. We are the 3rd largest county in the state of Ohio, and we currently serve 551,000 registered voters. In the 2012 presidential election, we saw a 75% voter turnout with 422,000 ballots cast. This committee has a strong interest in seeing improved accessibility to the ballot for voters. We share that interest with you. In the summer of 2012, the Hamilton County Board of Elections spent approximately $75,000 in ADA improvements to our polling locations, and as we speak here today, the lobby in our building, just a few blocks down the road here, is being remodeled to accommodate a wheelchair lift. All of this work has been done with one goal in mind: better accessibility for everyone in Hamilton County to the Board of Elections to conduct their business with us, and better access to the polling locations. As you know, Ohio conducts absentee voting for 35 days before Election Day. In Hamilton County, we had 113,000 absentee voters in the 2012 election, with 24,000 of those voters voting their ballots in person at our BOE office. The remaining 96,364 chose to conduct their absentee voting by mail. There was a total of 170 hours of absentee in-person early voting in the November 2012 election. We are the first county in Ohio, if I can brag for just 1 second, to install a voter drop box on the exterior wall of our building. Voters can deposit 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, their voter registration forms, their absentee ballot applications, and even their voted absentee ballots into our drop box. The interior receptacle for that drop box is an interior double-locked room. Again, we continually seek options for increased accessibility for all voters in Hamilton County. We continually review our processes and constantly evaluate all of our procedures following each election, trying to constantly strive to do better. However, as all of us understand here too well, the economic downturn of the last few years has resulted in the need to do more with less, and we've done exactly that. Boards of elections need to continue to do even more, and sometimes that more is actually last-minute alterations to our processes, which are a strain on our budget. These last-minute alterations are often the result of the need to accommodate a court order. In administering elections, we have found that the road to Election Day isn't always a straight nor a smooth path. Think of a Board of Elections in a large county as a train that's been proceeding steadily on its track, slowly gaining momentum and speed as it reaches Election Day, and then sometimes a week or two before the Election Day, and sometimes even in the 11th hour, our track has been detoured even if slightly, which results in us conducting special accommodations to our processes. These are our workarounds that provide us with challenges. Staff must develop plans and procedures to satisfy the requirements of these impactful decisions, but by always remembering to follow Ohio law and look to our Secretary of State for his uniform guidance and direction, we continue to administer fair, open, efficient, and secure elections for Hamilton County voters. This is good for Hamilton County. This is good for Ohio. And thank you for allowing me to address you here today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sherry Poland, and I serve as the Operations Administrator for the Hamilton County, Ohio Board of Elections. During my tenure, I have administered over 35 elections, including 3 presidential elections. I thank you for the opportunity to speak a little about the practical side of administering elections. Prior to Election Day, we must secure 392 ADA-compliant polling locations to house 545 precincts. We recruit and train over 3,000 poll workers, test and prepare over 2,000 pieces of voting equipment, create and print over 600,000 ballots with hundreds of different ballot styles, manage a voter registration database with over 550,000 registered voters. In the 2012 presidential election, Hamilton County alone managed over 1 million pieces of paper for one election. Bipartisan teams work together to conduct all of these processes with a common goal: to conduct fair, secure, and efficient elections. These processes are also conducted under very strict time constraints. As you all are well aware, there's no delay in Election Day. That then brings us to the height of the election cycle, Election Day. Election officials spend the day ensuring voters have access to the ballot, providing support and guidance to poll workers, and finally counting the ballots and reporting the results. But the election does not end on Election Day. Boards now must retrieve and inspect the election equipment and supplies, reconcile ballots cast, record voter credit, and verify the validity of provisional ballots, the safety net for voters. I was going to take this opportunity to walk you through that complicated process of verifying, but due to time constraints, I'll just summarize that it is a complicated process, and it has become more complicated through court involvement and 11th hour litigation. I would just like to reiterate the statements of my fellow elections officials. It's very difficult to hit a moving target. We need uniform, consistent, and common sense rules. I believe if we do that, it will lead to an improved voting process for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mary Siegel, and I'm one of the founders and leaders of Ohio Voter Integrity Project. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit group of voters who care about elections. Our organization has researched Ohio voter rolls and have presented over 1,000 voter challenges statewide. These voters were challenges based on fraudulent voter registrations and absentee ballots, voters registered at fictitious addresses or vacant lots, people voting in the wrong county, in the wrong state, and voters registered at business addresses. Sounds unbelievable. It's true. These irregularities can be attributed to a variety of issues with our electoral process, but for the sake of time, I'd like to focus on one of our greatest concerns, the processing of new registrations. In order to effectively clean up the voter rolls, there needs to be a system in place that ensures that new registrations are legitimate, accurate, and complete before they ever are entered onto the voter rolls. Presently, our system does not provide this protection. I recently challenged the registration of the God Divine Refinement Allah, who was registered in downtown Cincinnati and entered onto the voter rolls in October of 2012. Based on my research and verified by the Hamilton County Board of Elections, every single aspect of Mr. Allah's registration was fraudulent. But Mr. Allah was still entered onto the voter rolls. Why, I asked? The application was considered complete because all required boxes were filled in. Mr. Allah has not voted to date, but his name will be listed by law in his precinct signature poll book as a potential voter for a minimum of 4 years and 2 federal election cycles. The processing of complete but fictitious voter registrations is not specifically addressed by NVRA, HAVA, or the Ohio Revised Code. In all three laws, there is an assumption that the information provided by the registrant is truthful. For example, in NVRA, administration of voter registration procedure discusses any eligible applicant. In HAVA, statewide voter registration requirements make provisions for the legally registered voter, and in the Ohio Revised Code, the board is instructed to be satisfied as to the truth of the statements in the registration. So what happens if the applicant is not eligible, the voter is illegally registered, or the board is not satisfied? As shown by the case of Mr. Allah, they're added to the voter rolls anyway. In 2012, studies showed that counties in many states had more registered voters than eligible voters. In Ohio is one of those states. As a matter of fact, as John Husted said earlier today, Ohio has 3 counties with more registered voters than 100% of the eligible voters. The reason we believe is largely due to fictitious voter registrations. Fictitious registrations not only bloat the voter rolls, they cost the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars in printing, postage, and man hours, and open the door to voter fraud. Maintaining the accuracy of voter rolls is the chief duty, or the duty of every state's chief election official. I applaud Secretary of State Husted for his online voter registration changes and his proposed online registration. However, we need more. And to sum up, we believe that these examples show that testify the fact that the system as it exists is too easily corrupted and clearly demonstrates the need for election reform. And I'm out of time, and I thank you again. And I do have I didn't get the memo on the 3 minutes, so I have my 5-minute written testimony to submit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Holzoffel, and I am representing Women for Liberty. Every day during early voting last year, members of our group stood outside the Hamilton County Board of Elections. We were there to hand out our sample conservative ballot, a Frederick Douglass Republican sample ballot, and a booklet on Frederick Douglass. We were polite and respectful to the voters and cooperated with the Board of Election officials and guidelines for working outside the Board of Elections. We were cognizant of the required distance that must be kept between ourselves and the voter, and that we were not to engage in conversation with them while they were waiting in line. We told them that we were there to offer a choice with our sample ballot. We were confronted daily by workers who were handing out the sample Democrat ballots and campaign pieces. They attempted to block our access to the voter. They told the voter that he or she did not want our ballot, that it was a pack of lies. Even a Democrat candidate behaved in the same manner. Some voters appeared to be intimidated by the rudeness that they were witnessing. Some who were interested in seeing our information were hesitant to show their interest. As the weeks progressed, the scene in front of the Board of Elections took on the appearance of a circus, complete with a donkey, a man on a Segway with a bullhorn, visiting celebrities. Pizza, water, hot chocolate, and donuts were served to the voters waiting in line. We watched as Job Corps buses pulled up daily, as students exited buses and were handed Democrat ballots. We could not get close enough to them to give them our information. Cars blocked the street and would not move. It was assumed that all African American voters were going to vote for Obama, an inappropriate judgment to be made and an intimidation of the voter. One of our members was spat upon. An African American volunteering for a Republican candidate was harassed and called Uncle Tom. It was disappointing and discouraging demonstration of a lack of civility, as well as a lack of respect for individuals and a disregard for the law. I would ask that those who work outside polling locations during early voting and on Election Day receive some training and civility be required. A lack of such behavior should result in dismissal from the location. Thank you for my opportunity to address you.
Thank you. Adele Eisner.
Good afternoon. I really appreciate this opportunity. I've seen this panel since yesterday morning. I was thrilled with hearing the panel yesterday about the machines, about election technology and the future of, because my main reason for coming here from Cuyahoga County was to speak about the need for the EAC, and that's, I've heard it over and over and over, our bottom line standards that are absolutely necessary. I'm a member of an organization called CASE Ohio, Citizens Alliance for Secure Elections. I have been an election observer since 2004, constantly. Have been inside the counting and the polls, et cetera, legally inside, watching election administration. And I have lived in Cuyahoga County. I want to say that a large county, we're about the size of Cook County. We're smaller than LA County, but about the size of Cook County or Orange County. About 1,100 precincts and about 900,000 registered voters. There have been many fabulous best practices happening in Cuyahoga County, and I was one of the greatest original detractors. But with a new administration, firm management, and real transparency with voters, so much has been improved. Transparency with voters. As I've listened here, and you can hear that my thoughts are kind of all over the place, and I can imagine what you folks are going through. There are so many viewpoints. There are so many conflicting goals. There are even conflicting values. So I'll go back to the Cuyahoga County example in 1 second, but with my time almost running out, the biggest thing that I've gotten from here is I pray that as you begin your harrowing task of putting together some sort of report, that you start by agreeing on values, goals, and perspectives would come from that. But you start with what is north here. And I hope that as everyone has come before you, everyone feels a little bit disabled, and I'm not putting down the disability community, but everyone is saying, you know, I work so hard, we do all this at the end, and I realize that. But the independent voters need more. Everybody needs more, and everybody comes and says, "Give me more." You know, cut the pie my way. Well, that's kind of like what's happening in our election setting, but we are serving voters because not just as customer service, but keep a broad outlook that this whole thing is about electing our decision makers for the next 2 years, the people who will be making our decisions for the next 4 years, the next 6 years, depending upon the office. It's not just about being nice to voters. It's about making sure the process is completely accurate and transparent to voters. And that's one reason the Cuyahoga County has...
Thank you, but could you summarize, please?
I'm summarizing right now. Thank you. It's late and it's Friday, and everybody's getting hungry. But Cuyahoga brought in voters. Don't treat voters like guests, and be kind to guests. Really include voters, as was spoken about by Mr. Bennett from LA County. Bring them in. Voters are the most important stakeholders in the entire thing because we live with the results. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the commission? If not, we thank you all for coming. Again, it's been a very helpful session for all the commissioners. Thanks.